The dust hung thick in the air of the deepest vault beneath the Kethmori archives. Archivist Zelnara moved carefully between the towering shelves, her 6 arms working in perfect coordination to handle the ancient data crystals. Each crystal contained knowledge from civilizations that had fallen long before her own species had discovered fire. She paused before a section marked with warning symbols in 17 different extinct languages. The translations all said the same thing. Forbidden knowledge. Access restricted by Council Order 847, Alpha. But today, those restrictions no longer mattered. The emergency alert that had brought her here changed everything. The crystal she sought glowed a deep red in the dim light. It bore the seal of the Vex-Thani Empire, a civilization that had ruled half the galaxy 3,000 years ago, before vanishing overnight. The label read simply, Terra. Zelnara inserted the crystal into the reader with trembling hands. She had studied the Vex-Thani for decades, but had never been permitted to access their restricted files. Now, with long-range sensors detecting impossible energy signatures from the Sol system, the Council had finally granted her emergency access. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the image of a Vex-Thani commander. His scales were scarred, his eyes haunted. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute terror. To whoever finds this record, know that we have failed. The species we thought we had destroyed has returned, and they are not what our legends claimed. We called them monsters, demons, destroyers of worlds. We were wrong. They are so much worse. Zelnara's breathing quickened. Every galactic child knew the stories of the Terra demons. They were cautionary tales told to keep young ones from venturing too far into space. According to legend, humans had been a violent species that had destroyed themselves in nuclear fire, leaving their home world as a warning to others about the dangers of unchecked aggression. The Vex-Thani commander continued. We believed the reports from our deep space scouts. The third planet of the Sol system showed massive radiation signatures. Cities turned to glass. Oceans boiled away. We assumed they had followed the path of so many other species before them, extinction through their own violent nature. The display showed images of Earth as the Vex-Thani had found it. The planet was indeed scarred, continents reshaped by unimaginable destruction. But Zelnara noticed something the ancient records had never mentioned. The damage was not random. It showed patterns, organization, almost as if the destruction had been carefully controlled. We were fools, the commander's voice cracked. The radiation signatures were not from weapons of war. They were from something far more terrifying. The humans had learned to harness the same forces that power stars. They had not destroyed themselves. They had shed their old world, like a snake sheds its skin. Zelnara felt her 4 hearts racing. The energy signatures her people had detected from Sol were not random. They were massive, organized, and growing stronger by the day. Something was alive in that system, something that had been dormant for millennia. The recording showed star charts with Vexani fleet positions. We sent our finest battle groups to investigate. 12,000 ships, the pride of our empire. They found humans living in great structures that floated in the void between worlds. Cities built inside asteroids, farms that grew in the cold darkness of space. They had not just survived their world's death, they had transcended it. The images that followed made Zelnara's blood run cold. Human ships that seemed to be grown rather than built. Weapons that tore holes in reality itself. Worst of all, humans themselves, changed by millennia in the void. They moved like shadows, spoke in whispers that could be heard across vacuum, and their eyes held the cold patience of creatures who had learned to hunt among the stars. We tried to communicate, the commander whispered. They responded with perfect understanding of our language, our culture, our weaknesses. They knew everything about us, had been watching us for centuries. When we asked why they had hidden themselves, their leader smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. The display showed a human face, pale and sharp-featured, with dark eyes that seemed to look directly through the recording at Zelnara herself. When the human spoke, his voice was soft and reasonable, which made his words even more chilling. "We learned patience from the void," the human had said. "Your people, all of your people in this galaxy, are still children playing with fire. We have been watching, waiting, learning. When you are ready to be taught, we will emerge. Until then, we remain in the dark, between stars, preparing." The Vexthani commander's voice broke completely. "They let us leave. All of us. 12,000 ships, and they let us return home to deliver their message. But the message was not in their words. It was in their mercy. They could have destroyed us with a thought, and we never would have seen it coming." Grode. The recording began to fade, but the commander's final words were clear. "We have decided to abandon this galaxy. Our entire civilization will seek new homes beyond the rim. We leave this warning for those who come after us." The stories spoke of monsters called humans. The legends did not deceive. They simply failed to understand what kind of monsters they truly were. And, as the crystal went dark, Zelnara sat in the silence of the archives. Above her, she knew the council was debating how to respond to the energy signatures from Sol. They were planning first contact protocols, preparing diplomatic missions, discussing trade agreements. None of them understood what was coming. The humans had not hidden from the galaxy out of fear. They had hidden themselves because they were predators, and predators only revealed themselves when they were ready to hunt. After 3,000 years of silence, something had finally made them ready. Zelnara reached for her communicator with shaking hands. She had to warn the council, had to make them understand. But as she touched the device, she wondered if it was already too late. If the humans were truly awakening after millennia of patience, then the galaxy was about to learn why extinct civilizations had fled rather than face them. The legends had not deceived. They had simply failed to tell the whole truth. The diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge represented the finest achievement of Galactic Council engineering. Its hull bore the symbols of 43 different species, a floating testament to unity and peaceful cooperation. Captain Yithmora felt proud as his ship approached the coordinates where the human transmission had originated. The message had been simple, almost disappointingly so. "Come alone." It was signed by someone called Kim Hae-jin, identified only as Speaker for Terra. "Still no visual contact," reported his sensor officer, a nervous Kellian whose tail hadn't stopped twitching since they'd entered the Sol system. "But the energy readings are unusual, Captain." Yithmora studied the displays. Space around them seemed empty, but the sensors detected massive gravitational anomalies. It was as if invisible cities floated in the void, bending space itself around their bulk. The bridge fell silent when space simply opened in front of them. There was no flash of light, no dramatic emergence from hyperspace. One moment they faced empty void. The next moment, a human ship hung before them like it had always been there. "How did they?" the sensor officer began. "They were cloaked," Yithmora said, but he wasn't sure he believed it. The readings showed no trace of cloaking technology. It was as if the human ship had simply chosen to become visible. The human vessel was unlike anything in the Council's databases. It seemed to be grown rather than built, its surface flowing like liquid metal. Strange patterns moved beneath its hull, almost like veins carrying glowing blood. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced. The view screen activated, revealing a human male sitting in what appeared to be a simple chair. He was young, by Council standards, perhaps equivalent to 30 standard years, with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore clothing that was elegant but unremarkable. He looked completely ordinary, which somehow made him more unsettling. "Greetings," the human said in perfect galactic standard. I am Kim Hae-jin. Thank you for accepting our invitation to meet. Yithmora straightened in his command chair. The honor is ours, Speaker Kim. I am Captain Yithmora of the vessel Harmony's Edge, representing the Galactic Council in the spirit of peaceful first contact. Kim smiled, and Yithmora felt a chill run down his spine. The smile was warm and friendly, but there was something behind those dark eyes that reminded him of the predators from his home world. Peaceful contact. Yes, I think that would be best for everyone involved. Before Yithmora could respond, alarms began screaming across his bridge. Captain! The sensor officer shouted. Multiple contacts approaching fast. Pirate vessels. At least 20 ships. The view screen split, showing Kim on one side and tactical displays on the other. The pirate fleet was closing rapidly, weapons already charging. These were Drakthari raiders, known for their brutality and their habit of attacking anyone they perceived as weak. Speaker Kim, Yithmora said urgently, we're under attack by hostile forces. You should retreat to safety while we... Kim held up one hand, and Yithmora found himself unable to speak. The human's expression hadn't changed, but something fundamental had shifted in the air around them. Captain, please observe carefully. This will be educational. The pirate ships opened fire, sending streams of plasma toward both vessels. Yithmora's shields flared to life, absorbing the assault with difficulty. But the human ship didn't even seem to notice the weapon's fire. The plasma bolts simply stopped existing when they came within a certain distance of Kim's vessel. 23 ships, Kim said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather. The Drakthari Battle Group 7, under the command of war leader Groxthak. They've been raiding this sector for 6 months, responsible for the deaths of approximately 40,000 innocent civilians. Yithmora stared. How do you know that? We know many things, Captain. For instance, we know that your shields will fail in approximately 90 seconds at their current rate of fire. We also know that you carry a crew of 417 beings, including 12 younglings who are along for their first diplomatic mission. The human ship began to move. But move was the wrong word. It didn't accelerate or turn. It simply was in a different place. Then another place. Flowing through space, like thought itself. As it moved, the pirate vessels began to scream. Not their ships. The pirates themselves. What are you doing to them? Yithmora whispered. Teaching, Kim replied. His voice remained calm. But now there was something underneath it. Something that made Yithmora's primitive brain scream warnings about apex predators. The Drakthari believe that strength comes from causing fear and pain. They are about to learn what fear actually means. One by one, the pirate ships simply stopped. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Stopped. They hung motionless in space while their crews shrieked in terror over open communication channels. Yithmora could hear them begging for mercy in their guttural language, but mercy for what? No weapons had been fired. No visible attack had occurred. We are not harming them, Kim explained, as if reading his thoughts. We are simply showing them the truth. Every life they have taken, every moment of pain they have caused, every family they have destroyed, they are experiencing all of it, simultaneously, from the perspective of their victims. The screaming lasted exactly 3 minutes. Then, silence. They are alive, Kim continued. But they will never again be able to raise their hands in violence. The memory of what they have done, what they have felt, will prevent them. We call it rehabilitation. Yithmora found his voice. You did that to an entire fleet in minutes. How? For the first time, Kim's expression shifted slightly. The smile remained, but his eyes grew colder. Captain, your species developed faster than light travel 400 years ago. Our species was bending the fundamental forces of reality 3,000 years ago. The gap between us is not one of technology. It is one of evolution. The human ship began to fade from view, but Kim's image remained on the view screen. Please return to your council and give them this message. We will be in contact soon to discuss the future of this galaxy. Until then, we suggest you begin preparing your people for significant changes in how things work. Wait, Ythmora called out. What kind of changes? Kim's smile grew wider, and Ythmora realized he was looking into the eyes of something that had spent millennia learning patience in the cold dark between stars. Want? Captain? We want nothing from you. But we have spent 3,000 years watching this galaxy tear itself apart with petty wars and meaningless conflicts. We have decided it is time to take a more active role in galactic affairs. The transmission ended, leaving Ythmora alone on his bridge with his terrified crew and 23 pirate ships full of broken warriors who would never fight again. In the distance, space itself seemed to ripple as invisible human cities moved through the void, carrying technologies and powers that made the Council's greatest achievements look like children's toys. As they began their journey home, Ythmora realized that everything the galaxy thought it knew about itself was about to change. The humans were not the primitive survivors they had expected. They were something far worse than the ancient legends had described. They were teachers who had decided that the galaxy's childhood was over. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council had never seen such tension. Representatives from 147 species filled the vast amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of fear, anger, and confusion. At the center of it all stood Council President Vorthek, his massive form imposing even by the standards of his warrior species. The emergency session had been called immediately after Captain Ythmora's return. His report had sent shockwaves through every government in the galaxy. The humans were not only alive but possessed technology that seemed to violate the known laws of physics. Order! Vorthek's voice boomed across the chamber. We will have order! The noise gradually died down as all eyes turned to the center platform, where a simple human figure sat quietly in a chair that had materialized from nowhere. Kim Hae-jin looked exactly as he had during the first contact, calm and unremarkable. But his mere presence seemed to change the very air in the chamber. Honored delegates, Vorthek began, his voice carrying carefully controlled authority. We have gathered to discuss the terms of peaceful coexistence with the human species. We understand that your people have advanced capabilities, and we wish to establish proper diplomatic relations. Kim nodded politely. Thank you for the invitation, President Vorthek. Though I should clarify something from the beginning. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is us informing you of how things will be. A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the chamber. Ambassador Krelthon of the Hegemony States rose to his feet. With respect, Speaker Kim, no single species can dictate terms to the entire galaxy. We have stood together for over 1,000 years. You have stood together, Kim interrupted gently, while approximately 4 billion sentient beings died in preventable conflicts during that same period. Your unity has been quite selective. The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Krelthon sat down heavily, unable to argue with the simple truth of those numbers. Vorthek leaned forward. We acknowledge that the galaxy has its problems, but surely we can work together to solve them. We are prepared to offer your species full membership in the Council, with all the rights and privileges that entails. Perhaps you could start with a single system, Earth itself, and we could establish trade agreements. Kim's quiet laugh cut through the president's words like a blade through silk. President Vorthek, I appreciate the offer, but I think there's been a misunderstanding about the scope of human presence in this galaxy. He gestured, and the air above the chamber filled with a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Hundreds of star systems glowed with soft blue light, scattered across every sector, every region, every supposedly empty patch of space. These are human colonies, Kim said conversationally. We currently maintain active populations in 471 star systems. We have been quietly settling worlds for the past 1,500 years. always careful to avoid disturbing your various territorial claims. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted questions, demands, accusations. How was this possible? How had they hidden so many colonies? Why had no one detected them? Kim waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing. You couldn't detect us because we didn't want to be detected. Your sensor technology is quaint. Your understanding of physics is approximately where ours was 3 millennia ago. You have been looking for us in dimensions you can perceive, while we have been living in spaces that exist between your reality and ours. Ambassador Tisara of the Science Collective, her tentacles writhing in agitation, stood up. Impossible! There are no dimensions between reality. Physics doesn't work that way. Your physics doesn't work that way, Kim corrected. But then, your physics still thinks faster than light travel, requires exotic matter, and dimensional folding. We moved beyond such crude methods long ago. Vorthek felt control of the situation slipping away. What do you want? He demanded. Territory? Resources? Tribute? Kim's expression shifted slightly. And for a moment, something vast and patient looked out through his eyes. We want the killing to stop. The simple statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. For 3,000 years, we have watched this galaxy tear itself apart. Wars over resources that could be shared. Conflicts over territories that could be jointly developed. Genocides over differences that could be celebrated. We have watched, and we have learned. And we have decided that your species are not capable of governing themselves responsibly. The ambassador from the militant union rose to his feet. You speak of genocide, human. But what of your own history? The legends say your species was the most violent in the galaxy. Kim nodded. The legends are correct. We were violent, destructive, selfish creatures who nearly destroyed our own world and everyone on it. But that was before we learned. Learned what? That violence is a choice, Kim replied. That cooperation produces better results than competition. That diversity strengthens rather than threatens. That patience can achieve what aggression cannot. It took us nearly 1,000 years to fully understand these lessons, but we learned them well. He stood up from his chair, and though he was smaller than most of the delegates in the chamber, his presence seemed to fill the entire space. We spent the next 2,000 years teaching ourselves to be better, to be worthy of the power we had gained, to be responsible stewards of the forces we could command. The galaxy map changed, showing shipping routes, trade lanes, and territorial boundaries. Now, we have decided that it is time to teach the same lessons to the rest of the galaxy, whether you want to learn or not. Ambassador Krelthon found his voice again. You're talking about conquest, about imposing your will on sovereign governments. No, Kim said softly. We're talking about growing up. Your species are adolescents, playing with weapons of mass destruction. Left alone, you will eventually destroy yourselves and take most of the galaxy with you. We cannot allow that to happen. Vorthek stood to his full height, every instinct telling him to fight, to resist, to defend his people's independence. And if we refuse? If we choose to maintain our sovereignty? Kim looked at him with something that might have been pity. Then you will learn what we learned when we were young and foolish. That the universe does not care about your choices. That power belongs to those who have earned it through patience, wisdom, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The chamber fell silent again. In that silence, every delegate began to understand the true horror of their situation. The humans were not offering them a choice between submission and freedom. They were offering them a choice between voluntary cooperation and involuntary education. We will give you time to discuss this among yourselves, Kim said, his voice returning to its conversational tone. 1 standard year to demonstrate that you can resolve your current conflicts peacefully. If you succeed, we will work with you as partners. If you fail, He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As Kim's image faded from the chamber, leaving only an empty chair, Vorthek looked around at his fellow delegates. In their eyes, he saw the same terrible understanding that filled his own heart. The monsters from the old legends had returned. But they were not the mindless destroyers the stories had described. They were something far more frightening than that. They were teachers who had grown tired of watching their students fail. War Marshal Krexthok stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching as his invasion fleet prepared for the final assault. 6 months had passed since the human ultimatum, and the Drakthari Empire had spent every moment of that time preparing for war. "Status report," he growled, his massive form casting shadows across the bridge crew. "All battle groups in position, Marshal," replied his tactical officer. 1,500 ships, our finest warriors, ready to show these soft mammals what Drakthari strength means. Krexthok's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The humans had made a fatal error by revealing themselves. They thought their parlor tricks with pirate raiders would intimidate the greatest military force in the galaxy. They were about to learn the difference between frightening weaklings and facing true warriors. The target was a human colony world called New Harmony, home to approximately 2 million civilians. Intelligence reports suggested minimal defenses, a few orbital platforms, and perhaps a small patrol fleet. It would be the perfect demonstration of Drakthari might. "Begin the assault," Krexthok commanded. The fleet surged forward, weapons charging, fighters launching from their bays like angry insects. They had studied the recordings from the pirate encounter, analyzing every detail. Whatever the humans had done to those raiders, it required close proximity. A massive fleet assault, from multiple vectors, would overwhelm their defenses. As they approached New Harmony, Krexthok felt confidence building in his chest. The planet hung peacefully in space, its orbital stations clearly civilian in nature. A few small ships moved between them, carrying cargo and passengers. There were no battleships, no defensive fleets, no military installations of any kind. "Target the orbital habitats first," he ordered. "We'll give the planet dwellers a demonstration of what happens when you threaten the Empire." The first wave of missiles launched, streaking toward the civilian stations. Krexthok watched with anticipation as death approached the unsuspecting humans. The missiles simply stopped. Not destroyed, not intercepted. Stopped. They hung motionless in space, as if time itself had frozen around them. "What?" Krexthok began. Space shimmered, and suddenly the human fleet was there. Not emerging from hyperspace, not decloaking, just there. 12 ships that looked like they had been grown from living metal. Their surfaces rippling with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced, his voice shaking. The view screen activated, revealing a human woman in a simple uniform. She had long, dark hair and eyes that seemed older than the stars themselves. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. "I am Captain Park Minjun, of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have approximately 30 seconds to withdraw your forces and return to your home territory. This is your only warning." Krexthok laughed, the sound echoing across his bridge. "One human female thinks she can threaten the might of the Drakthari Empire? You have 12 ships, we have 1,500. Surrender now, and we may allow some of you to live as slaves." Park Minjun's expression didn't change. "Time's up." What followed could not be called a battle. Battles required two forces fighting each other. This was an educational demonstration. The human ships moved through space like thoughts made manifest, appearing and disappearing in patterns that seemed to mock the laws of physics. They didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, Drakthari vessels simply began to experience failures. Not random failures. Precise, targeted, educational failures. Battle Group 7 found their weapons turning on each other. Battle Group 12 discovered their engines trying to propel them in 17 different directions simultaneously. Battle Group 3 watched in horror as their ship's hulls began to reshape themselves into more aesthetically pleasing configurations. "Damage report," Krexthok roared. "No damage, Marshal," his tactical officer replied, confusion clear in his voice. "All systems are functioning perfectly. They're just functioning wrong." Through it all, Captain Park's voice remained calm and conversational. "You call yourselves warriors, but you fight like children, with toys you don't understand. Your weapons are crude applications of barely controlled energy. Your tactics are predictable combinations of aggression and arrogance. You have no idea what real warfare looks like." As if to demonstrate, one of the human ships approached the Eternal Dominion. It didn't fire weapons or launch missiles. It simply existed near them, and Krexthok's flagship began to change. The bridge expanded, walls flowing like liquid to create a vast amphitheater. Drakthari crew members found themselves seated in comfortable chairs that had grown from the deck. Soft lighting replaced the harsh glare of battle stations. "What are you doing to my ship?" Krexthok demanded. "Teaching," Park replied. "Your species believes that strength comes from the ability to destroy. But destruction is the crudest possible use of power. Creation is far more difficult, and therefore, far more impressive." Around the expanded bridge, holographic displays showed Drakthari history. Not the sanitized version taught in their schools, but the truth. Worlds burned for resources that could have been shared. Populations enslaved for labor that could have been automated. Species driven extinct for the simple crime of existing in territory the Empire wanted. "Stop this," Krexthok snarled. "Show us your true weapons. Fight us like warriors." Park's image turned to look directly at him, and Krexthok suddenly understood what the ancient prey animals on his homeworld had felt when they looked into the eyes of their hunters. "Marshal, you don't understand. This is us fighting you like warriors. The difference is that we learned long ago that the greatest victory is to win without destroying your enemy. The greatest strength is to transform hatred into understanding." The holographic displays shifted, showing possible futures. The Drakthari Empire continuing its current path, eventually facing rebellion from its own oppressed populations. Worlds burning as their unsustainable expansion triggered ecological collapse. The slow extinction of their species as their violence turned inward. "This is what awaits you if you continue as you are," Park explained. "Your empire will fall within 50 standard years. Your species will be extinct within 100. Not because of any external threat, but because violence without wisdom always destroys itself." Krexthok found himself slumping in his command chair, the weight of truth crushing his warrior pride. Around the bridge, his crew stared at the projections with growing horror. "What do you want from us?" he whispered. "We want you to choose," Park replied. "You can return to your homeworld and continue the path you're on. We will not interfere, and you will have approximately 50 years to enjoy your empire before it destroys itself. Or, you can allow us to teach you a better way. And if we choose to fight you anyway?" For the first time, Park smiled. And Krexthok realized he was looking at something that had fought its way up from the bottom of the food chain to become an apex predator among the stars. "Then you will learn what we learned when we were young and foolish. That the universe has very little patience for those who refuse to grow up." The human ships began to fade from view, but Park's voice continued. "We will give your empire the same offer we gave the Council. 1 year, to demonstrate that you can solve your problems without violence. After that, we will solve them for you." As the Terran defense fleet vanished, leaving the Drakthari armada floating helplessly in space with their weapons disabled and their ships transformed into classrooms, Krexthok finally understood what his ancestors had truly faced when they first encountered humans. Not monsters who destroyed everything in their path. Something far more terrifying than that. Patient teachers who refused to let their students fail, no matter how much those students wanted to destroy themselves. 1 year had passed since the ultimatum, and the galaxy had not learned. President Vorthek stood in his private chambers, watching the news feeds that painted a picture of galactic chaos. The hegemony states had declared war on the mining collective over rare Earth deposits. The Drakthari Empire had resumed their expansion campaigns despite their encounter with human forces. 3 different species were engaged in what could only be described as genocide against their weaker neighbors. Worst of all, the Galactic Council itself had fractured. Unable to agree on how to respond to the human threat, member species had withdrawn into their own territories, abandoning centuries of cooperation in favor of desperate military preparation. The door chimed, and his aide entered with obvious reluctance. "Sir, there's a transmission coming in. It's from the humans." Vorthek nodded grimly. He had been expecting this. The wall screen activated, revealing Kim Hae-jin in the same simple chair he had occupied during their first meeting. But something had changed. The polite mask of diplomacy was gone, replaced by something that made Vorthek's primitive brain scream warnings about apex predators. "President Vorthek," Kim said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. "We gave your species 1 year to demonstrate that you could govern yourselves responsibly. You have failed." "We need more time," Vorthek began. "Time is what we gave you," Kim interrupted. "Time is what your species have had for millennia. Time is what the 47 million beings who died in preventable conflicts this year no longer have." The screen split, showing images from across the galaxy. War zones, refugee camps, worlds stripped bare by exploitative mining operations, species facing extinction because their territories contained valuable resources. "You were given every opportunity to choose cooperation over conflict," Kim continued. "Instead, your species chose to accelerate their self-destructive behaviors. The Council fractured rather than face hard truths. The Drakthari resumed their conquests. The hegemony states chose greed over sustainability. And throughout the galaxy, the strong continued to prey upon the weak." Vorthek felt something cold settling in his chest. "What are you going to do?" Kim's expression shifted, and for a moment, Vorthek saw something vast and patient that had watched civilizations rise and fall across the eons. "We are going to do what we should have done 3,000 years ago. We are going to take responsibility for this galaxy." The transmission cut to a wider view, showing not just Kim but the space around him. Vorthek's breath caught in his throat. Human fleets hung in the void around every major world in the galaxy. Not hundreds of ships, not thousands, but millions. They stretched from star to star, a web of impossible vessels that had appeared without warning or detection. "How?" Vorthek whispered. Kim's voice answered as if he could hear the question. "We have been preparing for this moment for 3,000 years, President. Every human colony, every hidden station, every secret facility has been building toward this day. We hoped it would not be necessary, but we knew that hope was likely naive." The display showed Earth itself, no longer the scarred world of legend but a gleaming jewel surrounded by structures that defied comprehension. Cities that floated in space, rings that circled the planet like halos, energy patterns that turned the entire solar system into a single vast machine. "This is what we have become while you were playing at civilization," Kim explained. "We learned to think in terms of millennia rather than decades, of species rather than individuals, of galaxies rather than worlds. We became something your languages don't have words for. Around every major world, the human fleets were moving now. Not attacking, not threatening, simply positioning themselves with the patience of entities that had learned to think on cosmic timescales. From this moment forward, this galaxy operates under new management," Kim announced. "All military conflicts will cease immediately. All exploitation of sentient species will end. All territorial disputes will be resolved through arbitration rather than warfare. Any species that attempts to continue their destructive patterns will find those attempts unsuccessful." The display showed what was happening across the galaxy in real time. Warships found their weapons simply refusing to function. Governments discovered that their military computers had developed a sudden commitment to peace. Resource extraction operations ground to a halt as their equipment began prioritizing environmental restoration over profit. This isn't conquest, Kim continued, answering the question that burned in every observer's mind. Conquest implies that we want to rule you. We don't. We want to teach you to rule yourselves responsibly. But since you have proven incapable of learning through voluntary instruction, we will provide involuntary education. Vorthek found his voice. You're talking about enslaving every species in the galaxy. No, Kim replied, and his voice carried a sadness that spoke of difficult decisions made after long consideration. We're talking about growing up. Your species are children who have been playing with weapons of mass destruction. Left alone, you will eventually trigger a cascade failure that sterilizes this galaxy. We cannot allow that to happen. The view shifted to show human administrators materializing on worlds across the galaxy. Not soldiers or conquerors, but teachers and advisors. They moved through alien cities with the calm confidence of beings who had seen every possible form of civilization and knew exactly what each one needed to succeed. Every species will be given the opportunity to learn, Kim explained. To grow beyond your current limitations. To develop the wisdom necessary to handle the power you possess. Some of you will embrace this education willingly. Others will resist. The display showed the Drakthari homeworld, where Marshal Krexthok stood in chains before a human tribunal. Not chains of metal, but chains of absolute certainty that resistance was futile. Those who resist will find themselves in a very comprehensive educational program, Kim continued. We have had 3,000 years to perfect our teaching methods. We are very good at helping species overcome their destructive impulses. Vorthek slumped in his chair as the full scope of the situation became clear. The humans had not simply conquered the galaxy. They had inherited it, like adults taking custody of children who had proven incapable of caring for themselves. How long, he asked. How long will this education take? Kim's expression softened slightly. As long as necessary. Some species will adapt quickly and earn their independence within a few generations. Others may require centuries to overcome their destructive programming. And some. He paused. And Vorthek saw something like regret in those ancient eyes. Some may never be ready for true independence. Those species will remain under our direct supervision indefinitely, not as punishment, but as protection for themselves and others. The transmission began to fade. But Kim's final words rang with the authority of natural law itself. The age of chaos is over. The age of responsibility has begun. Your species told stories of monsters called humans. Those stories spoke true. We are monsters. But we are monsters who have learned to be something more. We are the monsters who chose to become shepherds instead of wolves. As the screen went dark, Vorthek sat alone in his chambers, contemplating the future of his species. Outside, he could see human ships hanging motionless in the sky. Patient as mountains. Eternal as stars. The legends had not deceived. Humans were indeed monsters, creatures of such power and patience that they could reshape reality itself. But the legends had failed to understand the most terrifying truth of all. They were monsters who cared about the well-being of their prey. And there was no escape from love that powerful, no hiding from compassion that absolute. No resisting teachers who would spend eternity ensuring that their students learned to be better than they were. The galaxy's childhood was over. Its education had begun, whether it wanted to learn or not.